By the end of the 3rd century BCE, a settlement had been built on the Ile de la Cité. It was inhabited by a Gallic tribe known as the Parisii. When the Romans arrived, the Parisii were sufficiently organized and minted their own gold coins. Julius Caesar wrote in his commentaries that the inhabitants chose to burn their town rather than surrender it to the Romans. In the 1st century CE, the city known as Lutetia Parisiorum grew as a Roman town and spread to the left bank of the Seine. The straight streets and the public buildings in this town were characteristically Roman, including a forum, several baths, and an amphitheater. A series of barbarian invasions began in the late 2nd century. The town on the left bank was destroyed by the mid-3rd century, and the inhabitants took refuge on the island, around which they built a thick stone wall. This gave medieval Paris its iconic look. Today, the remains actually lie beneath the plaza in front of the Notre Dame. In the late Roman Empire, ancient Paris will continue to see more change. Lutetia Parisiorum was now simply referred to as Parisius. In addition, the still Roman town was becoming increasingly Christianized, and by the 4th century it will see its first bishop appointed and its first cathedral built. At this time, the waning Roman imperial authority was taking its toll. The breakdown in the empire's economic network and military protection had a rather drastic impact on Parisius, which fell into a notable decline. However, the town, and specifically the Ile de la Cité, never fully lost its importance thanks to its natural defenses and control of the river. During the 4th and 5th century, Germanic tribes made their way into Roman lands. By the end of the 5th century, the Franks, under Clovis, had captured Paris from the Romans, making it their own capital. From the 6th to the 11th century, the Frankish realms will be in a constant state of fracture and consolidation, thanks to the tradition of divided inheritance, which applied even to the sons of kings. The Merovingian dynasty of Clovis will give way to the Carolingian dynasty of Charles Martel, which will be split into 3 after the death of Charlemagne. This instability halted Paris's progress dramatically, because the church remained one of the few institutions with constant power. Most of the new construction came in the form of cathedrals, basilicas, and monasteries. The Ile de la Cité was always a source of some activity, but the right bank of the river remained quite unpopulated, and even the left bank was slowly developing. Some wooden barricades were added as defense, but the city as a whole remained quite vulnerable. This will prove to be a problem in the 9th century, when Vikings repeatedly launched attacks up the Seine. The bordering lands were often ravaged, but the Ile de la Cité, with its large walls and fortresses, would serve as an impenetrable refuge for the population. After the election of Hugh Capet, a Count of Paris, to the throne in the late 10th century, Paris became more important. Their reign will bring new life into the city of Paris. The population and commerce of Paris increased, with the gradual return of political stability and public order. Old structures were restored, new buildings founded, and the right bank of the Seine was finally populated. Over the following centuries, Paris developed into an important commercial, cultural, and religious center. The 12th century in particular saw the city experience an urban renaissance, as large building projects were founded by kings, bishops, and powerful guilds. Among these will be the Cathedral of Notre Dame. From a 15th century coronation of an English king, to the liberation of Paris in 1944 and 2019's fire that ravaged the Gothic monument, the 850-year-old cathedral has stood witness to the sweep of history. For many Parisians, Notre Dame, or Our Lady, is the very soul of their city. The story of Notre Dame begins in the mind of Maurice de Sully, the Bishop of Paris. His plan was to create a new place of worship that will be larger and taller than any before it, and which will be able to employ the latest architectural styles and techniques. Notre Dame will be built on the eastern end of the Ile de la Cité, on the ruins of 2 earlier churches, which were themselves predated by a Gallo-Roman temple dedicated to Jupiter. The foundation stone was laid by Pope Alexander III in 1163. However, work will continue in stages of improvement and expansion for 2 centuries. The cathedral went through an initial stage of construction from the 12th to the 13th century, during the reign of the Capetian dynasty, while Notre Dame was not yet finished in 1239, it already welcomed a sacred treasure brought back by Saint Louis, Christ's crown of thorns. A reception ceremony was organized to present this incredible relic to the Parisians. Another phase of building took place at the end of the 13th century, just before the start of the Hundred Years' War. Expansion to the cathedral included the addition of many large flying buttresses and the enlargement of transepts. After more than 100 years of work, the cathedral was finally finished. This long wait to see Notre Dame complete gave birth to a common French expression, to wait 107 years. Once complete, the church became one of the largest Western cathedrals and a masterpiece of Gothic art. The Gothic cathedral was a liber pauperum, a poor people's book, covered with sculptures vividly illustrating biblical stories for the vast majority of Parisians who were illiterate. The tympanum over the central portal on the west facade, facing the square, vividly illustrates the Last Judgment, with figures of sinners being led off to hell and good Christians taken to heaven. The sculpture of the right portal shows the coronation of the Virgin Mary, and the left portal shows the lives of saints who were important to Parisians, particularly Saint Anne, the mother of Virgin Mary. The exterior of the cathedral was also decorated with sculptures of a variety of fabulous and frightening monsters. These included the gargoyle, the chimera, a mythical hybrid creature which usually had the body of a lion and the head of a goat, and the Strix, a creature resembling an owl or bat, which was said to eat human flesh. They were part of the visual message for the illiterate worshippers, symbols of the evil and danger that threatened those who did not follow the teachings of the church. The gargoyles had a more practical purpose. They were the rainspouts of the cathedral, designed to divide the torrent of water which poured from the roof after the rain, and to project it outwards as far as possible from the buttresses and the walls and windows, where it might erode the mortar binding the stone. Amid all religious figures, some of the sculptural decoration was devoted to illustrating medieval science and philosophy. The central pillar of the central door of Notre Dame features a statue of a woman on a throne holding a scepter in her left hand, and in her right hand 2 books, one open, a symbol of public knowledge, and the other closed, a symbol of esoteric knowledge, along with a ladder with 7 steps, symbolizing the 7 steps alchemists followed in their scientific quest of trying to transform ordinary metals into gold. Some smaller changes were made to the cathedral in the following years, but nothing major was recorded until the 17th and 18th century. Renovation projects were meant to bring the cathedral up to the more classical style of the period. This included rebuilding the choir in marble, replacing many of the original stained glass windows and restoring the south rows. Additionally, it was decided that the original spire was so damaged by centuries of wind that it had to be removed. Notre Dame was particularly battered during the French Revolution. Its treasure was plundered, its statues were at best decapitated and at worst completely destroyed. Its spire was dismantled, devoid of its religious form and function. It was used as the temple of reason, a temple for a new belief system created to replace Christianity, which was based on the ideals of reason, virtue, and liberty. This religion was supposed to be universal and to spread the ideas of the revolution, summarized in its Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité motto, which was also inscribed on the temples. A special ritual was held for the Feast of Reason. The nave had an improvised mountain on which stood a Greek temple dedicated to philosophy and decorated with busts of philosophers. At the base of the mountain was located an altar dedicated to reason, in front of which was located a torch of truth. The ceremony included the crowd paying homage to an opera singer dressed in blue, white, and red, the colors of the Republic, personifying the goddess of liberty. After this, the church was used as a wine warehouse. Some even planned to raise it and sell the stones. But as always, Notre Dame stood firm. Fortunately, the cathedral was saved by Napoleon Bonaparte, who returned Notre Dame to the Catholic Church and chose it for his royal coronation. This was immortalized in one of the most famous paintings of the Louvre, Le Sacre de Napoléon, by Jacques-Louis David. Following the revolution, the horrors of the time, and the disinterest of Parisians, Notre Dame decayed. Victor Hugo, in love with the monument, decided to honor the noble cathedral in his book The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Once disliked, the world rediscovered the Gothic gem in a new light and committed to carry out the renovations it needed. A huge renovation and restoration project was launched under the direction of Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. The passionate architect gave all the form and majesty back to Notre Dame by dressing it with gargoyles, chimeras, and other fantastical statues. He also decided to raise a new spire, inspired by that of the Orleans Cathedral. After 20 years of work, Notre Dame then sported, to some extent, the face known so well to us today. Since the retaking of Paris, following the 100 Years' War in 1437, Parisians have been celebrating their military victories in the square in front of the cathedral. Thus, as in the 15th century, in 1918, a Te Deum, the hymn of feasts and victories, was sung there in honor of the armistice. On August 26th, 1944, a special mass was performed below the gargoyles and flying buttresses to celebrate the liberation from the Nazi occupation. Like other Parisian buildings on the banks of the Seine, in 1991, Notre Dame was recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, an honor underscoring the cathedral as an architectural masterpiece, unmatchable reference of Gothic architecture. In 2019, Notre Dame began to celebrate its 850 years with a great fanfare. Then, while it was undergoing renovations, the cathedral became its own crucible in a blaze that cost the world its magnificent roof. Although repairs are expected to last several years, much of the iconic architecture was saved and the building's foundations held firm. A definitive cause of the blaze has not yet been established, but claims have emerged that the electric bells inside the spire could have been the cause of the fire. Thanks to the strong mobilization in France and internationally, the cathedral is writing a new page in its history.
Sortez de la paille, les fusils, la mitraille, les grenades.